Good morning. I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News Now, coming to you from our digital desk. In just a minute, we're going to be taking you live to a meeting being held by the City of Cleveland and the Cleveland City Council's Safety Committee. They are going to be hearing from the consent decree monitoring team. Kind of a report, and it's not often that that monitoring team sits down with the city and lets them know where they are in the process of the Department of Justice's consent decree. You'll remember it was 2014, shortly after the shooting of Tamir Rice, that the U.S. Department of Justice came in and looked at the policies and the practices of the Cleveland Police Department, and in quote said that there was a pattern of unreasonable use of force. That's when both the city and the DOJ entered into this sort of agreement to make changes on training, on hiring, on the use of force. We have had progress reports in the past. Some of the changes have been made. Some of the training has been done. But even as recent as the last 2-3 months, we heard that there is more work to be done, and there have even been some regression in some areas. We know the Cleveland Police Department is woefully understaffed, currently somewhere around 200 fewer officers than they are budgeted for. It looks like the meeting has begun, so let's take you live to City Hall.
Spent a great deal of time opening up the meeting, but we are here today to hear from the federal monitor. That's Mr. Carl Racine, who's the new federal monitor. We also have, I understand, Professor Alicia Bell Hardaway, Deputy Monitor, and who was recently interim monitor, as well as Stephanie Young-Kura. I hope I pronounced that properly. The monitoring team is charged with overseeing implementation of the consent decree the city entered into with the U.S. Department of Justice, and is tasked with helping the court and the city gauge whether the decree's requirements are taking hold in practice. I'm pleased that the new team is going to come to update council on the progress, and I will state for the record that the previous monitor would not come to city council, and we were considering, council president, myself, we were considering, if need be, we were going to subpoena the former monitor. It would not come for some unknown reason. He told us if we wanted to hear the presentation, we should sit in the gallery over at the federal courthouse, which I thought was insulting, and so I'm glad Mr. Racine is here. I appreciate that greatly. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to come to the table, because we want to hear from you. Bring your team to the table if you care. And what I do want to say this before Mr. Racine has the opportunity to address the body. I'm looking forward to a working partnership with the monitor, and hopefully in the future we can schedule other appearances when you're in town, because we want to have that working relationship. So at that point, I'm going to stop and let you have the opportunity to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the City Council, public. I'm Carl Racine, and I'm honored and privileged to be the new monitor. With me, to my left, as you all know, is Professor Aisha Bell Hardaway. I need to note for the record that the professor has done an extraordinary job putting her heart, soul, and extremely capable brain to the monitoring team for years, and she's ably served as the interim monitor. I want to also emphasize to you, Mr. Chairman, and the council, that Professor Hardaway is assisting me and my team in a transition. As you know, this is a comprehensive consent decree, not one that is prone to coming up to speed in just a couple of months. And so I thank Professor Hardaway for all of her time and energy and the current time that she's giving this monitoring team. To my right is Abby Wilhelm. Abby Wilhelm is serving in a capacity that might be familiar to you, although it's not titled as the Chief of Staff to the monitor. That is really the way that she works, and she's also helping out on substantive areas of the consent decree. So Abby is also here with me. Before I get started on the history of the consent decrees, please allow me to introduce myself, as I've only been on the job for a couple of months. And as I noted, there will be a period of responsible transition that I expect to last for about a quarter or 3 to 4 months. So far, the new monitoring team has met every monitoring team member. We've been on site to meet with each party individually. That, of course, is the police department. That is the city of Cleveland authorities. We've met with the mayor. And, of course, we've met also with the police chief and members of the public. We've also, of course, had deep engagement with the Honorable Judge Solomon Oliver, who is the presiding federal judge over the consent decree. Up until January 2023, I was the first twice elected independent Attorney General of the District of Columbia, home to nearly 700,000 D.C. residents. This means that I was accountable to the people of the District of Columbia and no one else. And I chose to use my independence to be critical of D.C. agencies when they weren't serving the needs of the residents of the District of Columbia. If you do an internet search on me, you'll see that I've not been shy in regards to holding government agencies accountable for providing the services that taxpayers deserve. We'll get better acquainted, certainly, over time. And let me just say, Mr. Chairman, I accept your invitation to meet on a regular basis, and I certainly respect your office, and I know that in the consent decree specifically, the council is noted as an important player, through which the monitor should indeed engage and speak, because you represent the public, and we honor that. Just a couple more points about me. I'm someone who's honest in public and in private, and I'm honest about how the job is proceeding. Second, I'm someone with significant experience with consent decrees. When I took office in the District of Columbia as AG, there were 3 District of Columbia agencies under a consent decree or receivership. Those 3 consent decrees or receiverships were underway for 20, 30, and 40 years.
Pull your mic closer.
Okay.
There we go. And by the way, if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to make public comment, please see the clerk and we'll sign you up, and we'll hear that public comment when we're through with the presentations and questions of council members. Thank you. Proceed.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Is that better?
That's much better.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is being shown live, so they want to make sure they can hear you.
Okay. With the work of government agencies and the City Council, we made it a priority to bring the 3 D.C. agencies into compliance, and indeed, we succeeded in ending some of the longest-running consent decrees in the United States. Finally, you'll learn that we're someone who will come in and get the job done, and we're looking forward to bringing this consent decree to its proper conclusion when the consent decree is complied with. On my team, as you know, we've got a couple of team members here. I do also want to note that Charles C. is behind us, as well as Dr. Ronnie Dunn, 2 integral members, local members of the monitoring team. In addition, there are 4 other of my colleagues: Stephanie Yanakora, former U.S. Attorney in Los Angeles; Courtney Caruso, a deputy monitor in Ferguson; Jay Jones, a former legislative person in Virginia and on my team at the Office of Attorney General; and as I indicated, Abby Wilhelm. We are folks who've served in the public, and we take this mission and indeed this responsibility as public service. So let me allow you to give, let me give you a brief background as to how we got here and what a consent decree means for this city. March 2013, at the request of the mayor, Mayor Jackson, the Department of Justice opened an investigation into CDP. Many members of Cleveland's diverse communities, including community advocates, religious leaders, and members of CDP's patrol officer and management unions, took an active interest in the investigation and played a critical role in providing information and facilitating a thorough investigation. In December of 2014, the Department of Justice publicly announced that it had reasonable cause to believe that CDP engages in a pattern or practice of using excessive force. The city agreed that the Department of Justice findings raise issues of importance to the city and the community that should be addressed, and thus entered into an agreement to make necessary improvements. Thus, an outside independent monitor was appointed to ensure compliance with the terms of this agreement. We often refer to the agreement as the consent decree. We cannot underestimate the human cost of the situation that existed in 2013, 2014, and even before then. The Department of Justice's findings, which the city did not fully agree with, concluded that CDP engaged in a pattern or practice of using unreasonable force in violation of the Fourth Amendment. I encourage you all to read the Department of Justice's investigative findings, which detail horrific incidents, such as an incident in 2013 in which a sergeant shot a victim as he ran from a house where he was being held against his will by armed assailants, such as an incident in 2012 when an off-duty police officer dressed in civilian clothes observed what he believed to be a drug transaction take place, drew his handgun on a civilian without showing his badge, and tragedy ensued. Such as an incident from 2013 when Cleveland police officers placed a so-called spit sock on a mentally ill suspect. Kent then sprayed the pepper spray, the split stock, with the, while on the suspect's head. The suspect was handcuffed and placed in the back of a zone car. In 2012, over 100 Cleveland police officers engaged in a high-speed chase in violation of policies and fatally shot 2 unarmed civilians. These are just examples of what was occurring back in those times. I know we want to talk about how things are going, and of course that is fair discussion, and I look forward to your questions. As you know, we're nearly 8 years into this consent decree, and I know that this weighs heavily on Cleveland. Professor Hardaway is going to give an overview of the most recent 12th semi-annual report, but before she does so, I'll give you a high-level summary. The city has made demonstrable progress in the implementation of the consent decree. The finalization of division policies is an example, and the improvement of quality of training it provides to officers. The city has made encouraging progress and developments continue. For example, recently, the city hired Dr. Lee Anderson to lead the city's implementation team, a very necessary task that prior to Dr. Anderson's hiring, no one had that specific job. The city also elevated Commander McGuth, who's done an extraordinary job of helping to push the training and development forward. I want to commend him, and I also want to commend the police chief for his diligence. The progress must be acknowledged. There still is a lot of work that lies ahead, however. OPS has operated over the past year, for example, without a permanent administrator or a permanent senior investigator. Mr. Perez was just hired, and I look forward to observing his work, in particular to address the 150-plus backlog of cases We will need to restart the process of hiring an inspector general, which is no easy feat, but is necessary. And there's a lot of work to be done to bring the community along with us in the changes that are underway, especially with the newly established CPC. I look forward to working with the city, the Department of Justice, and the community to see this project through. I note that this is our 4th trip to Cleveland. We'll be back next week. We are very much on the ground and very much in the community. With that, I'm happy to yield to Professor Hardaway.
Since you've been appointed, this is your 4th trip to Cleveland?
I believe that is correct.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Professor?
Good morning, Councilman Polensek, and to the rest of the council members through the chair. As you all are aware, the consent decree has been evaluated by the monitoring team. Most recently, our March 23rd, 2023, 12th semi-annual report was presented to Judge Oliver in the federal courthouse during a status conference on that day. The reporting period is an evaluation of the city and the Division of Police's progress in the consent decree from June 1st of 2022 through December 31st of 2022. When we do our evaluations or we do our semi-annual reports, it's always a 6-month evaluation period. And as detailed in the report, there's a process by which our team endeavors to conduct our independent evaluations, present them to the parties for their feedback and input, and then finalize the report. The report evaluates 340 paragraphs from the settlement agreement, from the consent decree, that the city and the Division of Police are required to come into compliance with before Judge Oliver. And so that work requires a lot of diligence, thoroughness, and attention to progress across several substantive areas. I want to make sure that you all are aware of sort of what the terms of compliance mean. And so if you look at our report, general compliance, the report is broken down by what I call the pillars of the consent decree, each of the substantive areas: accountability, use of force, search, stops, and arrests, crisis intervention, data collection, officer wellness, and a host of other sections. Each of those sections then contain descriptions of the paragraphs that are being evaluated under those subsections. And then a color-coded designation for where the department or the city currently lives, if you will, on the continuum of compliance. That continuum starts at non-compliance and ends at general compliance. Non-compliance is exactly what it sounds like, right? The city and the division has not yet complied with the relevant provision of the consent decree. Partial compliance is that the city or the division has made significant initial or sufficient initial strides or partial compliance towards that area or that provision. Operational compliance, and I think the distinctions here are important so that we know the difference between operational compliance and general compliance. Operational compliance means that the city or the division has made notable progress to technically comply with the requirement, but has not demonstrated meaningful adherence to implementation. And then operational compliance is that the city and or the division has complied fully with the requirement. Mr. Racine identified both the work of the CPC. As you all know, a significant amount of time was spent during the reporting period interviewing, receiving applications, interviewing, and selecting individuals to sit on the CPC. And as a result of that, much of the work that had been done or had been achieved under what I call the consent decree created commission, right, was no longer in place with the charter created, the requirements of the charter created commission. And so, this is an important example for us to understand and recognize that none of these designations are static, right? They do not stay the same you can achieve a compliance in one area, and depending upon vacancies or other changes within the city or within the division, right, compliance can be lost or backslide, if you will. And so at some point, the CPC had achieved, demonstrated significant compliance across all of the areas of the consent decree. And then the voters passed Section 115, right, what is now 115, and things needed to be reset. As a result of the 13 areas relative to the CPC, we found 2, the creation of the body and the existence of the budget, which of course this body is very familiar with, right, the presence of the independent budget and resources for that body to be in general compliance, and the remaining 11 provisions, the remaining 11 of the 13 are currently in non-compliance. We expect for that to change as a result of the diligent work that the city has been doing with the CPC to get them trained in the requirements of the task before them, and to get them on their way with actually conducting or executing the requirements of both the charter provision and the provisions of the consent decree. In CPOP, which is Community Problem-Oriented Policing, there are 8 consent decree requirements under this section. 6 of them have been found to be in partial compliance. 1 was found to be in both operational and partial compliance, and another area in non-compliance. We look forward to seeing the division's progress in the area of the community problem-oriented policing. There's some technical assistance. One of the things I think that's important to share about the breadth and depth of the monitoring team is that in addition to us observing and assessing and having our finger on the pulse of the progress of the implementation of the work that the division is endeavoring to do here, we also have a breadth of expertise, individuals who have a breadth of experiences and expertise, which allow us, as required under the consent decree, to provide technical assistance to the division and to the city as necessary in order for them to reach areas, to reach a level of compliance. And so as a result of that, there is a former chief of police, Rick Myers, who serves on our team and is standing at the ready, has been in constant communication with Commander Maguth about the ways in which community problem-oriented policing can become knitted into the fabric, woven into the fabric and the culture of the Cleveland Division of Police. The accountability section is broken down across a few different areas, including the Police Review Board, the Office of Professional Standards, and Internal Affairs. In Internal Affairs, there are 16 provisions evaluated in the 12th semi-annual report. 4 of them were deemed to be in operational compliance, 8 are in partial compliance, and 3 were in non-compliance. The IA is now under the leadership of Superintendent Christopher Violent, who I'm sure many from the city are familiar with. He served for a period of time as the Inspector General under the consent decree, left and went to serve as the sheriff, and is now leading the Internal Affairs Division. He's aware and working hard to make sure that the staffing and the training of the staff is adequate in order to move the Internal Affairs Division into compliance. The Police Review Board, there are 9 areas under that requirement or that subsection of the decree. 3 are in general compliance, 4 in operational compliance, and 2 are in partial compliance. The Office of Professional Standards, which I hope many in the city is familiar with, that city is obligated to meet 36 provisions in order to come into full compliance with the consent decree. There has been, as Mr. Racine noted, a level of transition that has occurred over time. The Office of Professional Standards currently sits with 4 areas in general compliance, 4 requirements in general compliance, 20 in operational compliance, 9 in partial compliance, and 3 in non-compliance. We absolutely look forward to the work of Administrator Perez and stand again at the ready to provide technical assistance in that area. search and seizure, there are 15 areas. Operational compliance is found in 1, and 14 of them remain as partial compliance. CIT, crisis intervention, there are 29 areas evaluated under the consent decree. 8 are in general compliance, 11 operational compliance, and 9 in partial compliance. None are in non-compliance. And finally, in use of force, which I tried to pick the ones that were most relevant. Obviously, I haven't done every single subsection of the consent decree because you all would definitely be tired of me talking. But I'll just end with use of force. There are 72 areas evaluated under the consent decree related to use of force. There's 1 area in general compliance, 57 in operational compliance, 13 in partial compliance, and 2 in non-compliance. That concludes my summary as it relates to the work of our 12th semi-annual report. Mr. Racine has a printed copy of it here, so you see the task, the final work product of the task that was in front of us. I am grateful to the team that stood ready during the interim, particularly the help of Christine Cole and Lisa Fink, to work with me to write every word in that document that you see in front of you. I know it intimately and am willing to answer any questions that the Council Safety Committee may have.
Okay. Anyone else going to testify at all?
Not at this time.
Okay. Just a couple questions. So the overall, there were how many compliance sections that the city needed to achieve? Do we know collectively?
The paragraphs? 340.
340. So out of the 340, do we have a percentage of how many they have achieved or in compliance with?
I did not break down the report in that way.
Okay. So if that's something that you could provide us, I'd appreciate
Sure.
that. And we have our staff here will be taking those notes as well. The you indicated as well OPS was operating for a long period of time without a command person in charge.
Without a permanent administrator. That's
Yeah.
right. Yes.
You realize, you know how long that was without a permanent person?
Nearly 2 years,
2 years.
if not a little more than 2 years.
Okay. What's been your overall engagement with the city? And whoever can, has it been positive? Has the city been there to assist, to be a partner in the process? I'm trying to understand the relationship.
Sure. And as you know, my observations in terms of eyewitness interaction are limited to 3 to 4 months.
Yes.
What I can tell you is that I have engaged, our team has engaged repeatedly with the city. When we have asked for information, they have provided it. I think that this is an opportunity that we have, as I mentioned earlier in my opening testimony, in particular with the hiring of Dr. Anderson to be in charge of the implementation of the consent decree. That was done late in 2022. That's a significant hiring. What that did is it put a person in charge. Now she still has to hire a team and get help, but it let the officers and the police do their main job every day and has her main job the implementation of the consent decree. In the history of successful consent decrees, every single one has had an implementation manager. So we think that is a quite significant hiring, and again, look forward to her filling out her staff.
Good. Okay. The engagement with CPD has been positive.
Yes, I will tell you that I've been impressed in my engagements with Chief Drummond. I mentioned Commander Magooth, as did Professor Hardaway, and there are many others there who really, I think, have put the shoulder to the wheel and are making the kind of change in practice that we want to see.
How many times do you evaluate or make a report is on a quarterly basis? What is the mechanism? What's the time frame?
Sure. I think as Professor Hardaway indicated, pursuant to the consent
Right.
decree, our responsibility is to provide the city and the parties with detailed, and I do commend these reports to you and your staff, as they are extremely detailed, analysis of progress in relation to all of those hundreds of paragraphs, and that's done twice a year.
Twice a year, okay. And that report goes obviously to the mayor, to the law director, to the chief, to the safety director, and to city council, correct?
It's publicly available.
Yes, yeah.
And indeed, it goes everywhere.
Okay.
I do want to emphasize what Professor Hardaway said, which is that prior to publication of the report, a draft is provided
Right.
to the parties. The parties
Okay.
are the Department of Justice on the one hand, and of course, the city
Okay.
on the other hand. They have an opportunity to comment, suggest changes, and at the end of the day, the monitor works for the court. And so it's our responsibility to consider the changes, but at the end of the day, put in how we see things are actually occurring on the ground.
Okay. The monitoring team, who appoints the monitoring team?
It's a good question. Let me first address it in this way, telling you about the process in which we, the team from Hogan Lovells, that law firm in Washington, D.C., was appointed. That was pursuant to a competitive process in which I believe 7 or so other entities, bid, put their bona fides, and then interviewed, and then competed. There were 3 community events, including a virtual event. At that point, the city, the Department of Justice, recommended that the Hogan Lovells team be selected. The judge reviewed that, and it's the judge's call. I want to emphasize that. Judge Solomon Oliver Jr. Is in charge, and at the end of the day, it's the judge who made the decision to hire this monitoring team. Professor Hardaway can speak to the process and the judgments that predated our coming on to the monitoring team.
Okay.
Yeah, the process is typically the same. You all are aware that there was initially the first monitor, the team that me, Charles C., and others were a part of back in 2015, was led by an individual named Matthew Barge. Matthew Barge and I came before council with other members of our team, you might remember that, Chairman, to share a status report during his tenure. And then when he transitioned from the lead monitorship role, an individual named Hassan Aiden was serving as deputy monitor. And then the judge went through a process by which he was comfortable with appointing Mr. Aiden as the head monitor.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was I remember Mr. Barge being here, but Mr. Aiden is the one that said he did not have to come to city council, which concerned the council president and myself greatly. So I'm glad that there's been a change. The individuals, we have them. We have the monitor, but then there's all these other individuals, and there's been concerns raised about the dollar amount that has gone out. Explain that. Who appoints those folks? Who are all these people?
Sure. Let me at least give you a
Right.
response,
Right.
and then yield again to
Right.
Professor
Okay.
Hardaway, who was a member of those teams
Right.
almost originally,
Okay.
indeed originally, and then of course through her hard work and capacity rose to the level of being the interim monitor. As Professor Hardaway indicated, the consent decree is extraordinarily comprehensive and varied in subject matters. The paragraphs, indeed, are numerous, over 372. In order for us to have the kind of coverage that we need in order to participate in observations and assessments and to provide important technical assistance, we need to have a large monitoring team that is capable, that is, in fact, to the extent possible, local and expert. I do want to point out, and I welcome questions, of course, around budget and cost. That's what the city of Cleveland taxpayer deserves to know. On average, as I understand it, the cap around the monitoring team budget is about $1.1 million or so. I do want to emphasize that if you look at other monitorships in regards to cities that have gone through a similar process, that 1.1 is actually on the lower end of the range. That doesn't make the burden on Cleveland any lighter, but those are the facts.
Okay. I appreciate that. So the people, the folks on the monitoring team, how do they get on the monitoring team?
Sure. I think it would be most helpful if I defer to Professor Hardaway on that, and then come back afterwards and comment on a decision that we made in regards to our competition, if you will, in order to be monitored.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was approached by Matthew Barge back in 2015 because of my work at the university as a person who would have substantive area expertise to serve in a capacity, especially when you're dealing with a consent decree related to Fourth Amendment issues. And looking at the decree and the requirements of the decree, it requires a significant number of varied expertise and engagement, both of sworn personnel and non-sworn personnel, right? And so as a result, Mr. Barge put together a team of individuals that then went through the competitive bid process and interview process with both of the parties. And we were present in conversations or interviews with the City of Cleveland and the Department of Justice, as well as other teams who were being considered. And the parties went through their interview process to come to a point of making a decision to put in front of Judge Oliver the team that they thought would be best suited. You should know that of the individuals on the original team, the parties had and did exercise the right to identify others that they thought should be added to the team from other teams that they saw, and had decided that they would like to work on the team that was finally selected and appointed. And so it's a collaborative process through the parties of identifying individuals who would be able to serve in relevant subject matter areas, and then of course, as Mr. Racine has said, right, the final call is the judge's as it relates to what he thinks that the composition of the head monitors teams, the head monitors selected team will be able to carry out the role of serving as the agent of the court, responsible for understanding the pulse of what's happening in the implementation of the consent decree, able to provide the technical assistance needed to the City of Cleveland and the Department of Justice, right, and able to report back to him about the progress of that in a meaningful and comprehensive way.
So, how many are on the team? Because I see this list of folks, and is it correct that they receive $225 per hour? Is that correct?
Do you want to, Aisha, do you want to answer the number, and I'll answer the money
I
part?
wish I knew the number. The number right now is in flux, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because obviously we're in a period of transition.
Right.
And even without the period of transition, we have individuals who serve in different capacities. And so to the extent that there is, and maybe Abby knows, but to the extent that there's a core team of folks who are working on the day-to-day sort of like the implementation of the consent monitoring, the consent decree, there are also subject matter experts that we use only in the assessment realm, right? And so you may have a series of sworn personnel who are used to assess and review use of force or fit investigations, right, to determine whether or not the data that we have from the Division of Police is in line with the requirements of the decree. Those individuals are really subject matter assessors, right, and not necessarily members of the monitoring team, but nonetheless must be paid for the work that they do, right, and so factor into the budget if that's helpful. So you may see a list of individuals who are part of the assessment teams,
Right.
but not necessarily a member of the core monitoring
But
team.
what is that number? Do we know?
I
what
think
that
we're
number-
talking about a couple of dozen.
Couple.
And as Professor Hardaway indicated, there's a lot of fluidity there because there are different areas in the consent
Okay.
decree where you might see more progress or less progress, and we may need to
Okay.
provide more technical assistance and or less technical
So
assistance.
could you provide us an up-to-date list of the
Sure.
monitoring team? That would be helpful. But is it $225 an hour?
I think technically it's $250 an hour.
$50 an hour, okay.
And that's
And
a historic number.
And that would be for everyone who's on the team based on that, on their hours that they commit
That's correct.
per hour. So my question is this: when who monitors the monitors? So when you see people just come to meetings and just sit there, and is the meter running? I mean, I'm trying to figure out who monitors the monitor.
Look, there's and certainly an internal check and balance process
Okay.
whereby the monitor or the interim monitor is making sure that meetings are as effective and efficient as possible. In addition to that, of course, the billing is transparent. It goes both to the Department of Justice and to the city for final approval by Judge Oliver.
So if someone comes to a council meeting, would there be a reason for one of the monitoring team to come to a council meeting?
Depends on the subject of what's being discussed at the council meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, to the extent that, I mean, you all have had a series of meetings, right, related to the consent decree. As you noted, right, this is the first time, at least this year, in a number of years, that the monitoring team has been present. But the topic of the consent decree has been discussed numerous times before council, right?
Okay, so if we can get the list of the most recent or the active list of folks that are on the monitoring team, and I'm going to stop there because I know my other colleagues, and I want to say to we've been joined by some other colleagues, so I'm going to just stop here a moment, and I'm going to ask again, go down around the table so you can introduce yourself. We have Mr. Carl Racine, who is here, head of the monitoring team. So I'll start at Councilman Jones. Please introduce yourself and tell them what ward you're from.
I'm Councilman Joe Jones. I represent the Lee Harvard, Seville, Miles, Union area in the city of Cleveland, the further southeast section of the city. We border against Shaker Heights, Maple Heights, Warrensville, and Garfield.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, hello. Thank you for being here today, folks. Danny Kelly, I'm councilman from Ward 11. I'm with the Cadell area. I border Ward 16, 17, 15, and 13. It's a pretty gerrymandered district, but appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councilwoman Gray. I am Ward 4. I have Cleveland Shaker, Kinsman, Buckeye, Mount Pleasant, the southeast side, and I border against Ward 2 and Ward 6, and partially Ward 5.
Good morning. My name is Charles Slife. I represent Ward 17, which is the far western edge of the city.
Councilman Polensek again, Chairman of the Safety Committee. I represent the 8th Ward, and I represent the East Glenville, North Shore, Collinwood, and Collinwood Village neighborhoods.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephanie House, the councilwoman for Cleveland Ward 7, the communities of Huff, St. Clair, Superior, Goodrich, Kirtland Park, Asiatown, and sliver of downtown.
Thank you.
I'm Brian Casey. I represent Ward 16, which is part of the far west side of Cleveland, which includes West Park, parts of West Park, Jefferson, and Puritas Longmead.
Thank you.
Thank you, my colleagues, and I'm going to get right into the line of questions. As protocol, and again, I want to make the announcement again, if there's anyone in the public who wishes to testify, make comment, please see the clerk to my right, to your left, and you will have an opportunity as soon as we're through with the presentation line of questioning. And Mr. Racine, they have to be out of here by noon to make a flight. So again, I appreciate them spending the time with us. I call upon the Vice Chairman, Councilman Joe Jones, to start. And then any other, Councilman Slade, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this session today to talk about a very important matter for the citizens of the city of Cleveland. I want to thank Professor Hardaway and Abby Wilhelm and Mr. Racine. I had an opportunity to listen to much of what was said here this morning earlier. And my first question I would have, of the 340 various areas of study that the monitors are engaged and involved in for the citizens of the city of Cleveland, do we have any kind of hard copy paperwork that would show us where we stand in those areas? I think hearing earlier, Mrs. Wilhelm talked very detail-oriented on the subject matter of the various different areas, and wanted to get something in writing on that. Can we have that, Mr. Chairman?
Whatever you can provide to the body in writing, it would be great to have your presentation today. Once I know you see, I saw some notes on it, but if you want to clean that up and get us your presentation, because I thought it was very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. In addition, I would commend the council again to the 12th semi-annual report. Extremely detailed, thorough, literally no stone unturned. These semi-annual reports, again, pursuant to the consent decree, are published after each party, Cleveland and the Department of Justice, has a chance to comment and review. And they're available on the website, and we're happy to make them available to you.
What's the most recent date on that?
March 2023.
Okay. Councilman?
You're saying that March 2020 was the last?
I'm sorry.
2022.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I may not have been clear there. March 2023, just a couple months ago.
I see. And does that annual report also cover the 340 areas?
Yes, in great detail.
And it gives it a total breakdown, as Mrs. Wilhelm was testifying today?
Professor Hardaway went through the process in regards to the annual reports, and indeed, in the annual report, there is exhaustive detail in regards to progress or lack thereof with respect to all of the over 300 or so paragraphs.
Well, first, I want to thank you for the work that, and just listening to your testimony earlier, it seems like being sitting here at this table now since 2018, it seems like you really have a grasp at the task that needs to be done here in the city of Cleveland. My question would be, there was the talk about monitors. How many monitors do we currently have in the process right now?
Sure. There is one there is one court-appointed monitor. That is me. I am, the monitor and the leader appointed by Judge Solomon Oliver. I've got my team that's helping the leadership, and there is the former interim monitor and former monitoring member team who is still on our team. If you can help me continue to recruit Professor Hardaway to remain on the team, I would be quite appreciative of that. And so there is tremendous continuity amongst the 24 or so members of the monitoring team. I wanted to supplement a point that you asked about, Mr. Chairman, in regards to the number of people on the monitoring team. I thought it was really important as we considered a new monitor and as we put in a bid for the opportunity that we begin with continuity because I understand that the monitoring team has been going on now for 8 years. I was quite concerned that a complete overhaul would absolutely set the city back in terms of time and effort and knowledge. And that's why we decided at the outset that we wouldn't even be interested in being monitored if there wasn't continuity in the good work of the monitoring team.
Councilman?
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm going to ask something just a little bit off here. Right now Cleveland faces a shortage in police officers in representation of our communities and keeping our neighborhoods safe. In the process, we've seen through the very beginning of this up until now a super increase in crime, and to such a degree that when you look at the numbers from say 2005 all the way up until where we are currently, we're facing almost 180 to 190 homicides a year. With what you do here with monitoring and making sure that the 340 different separate areas will be achieved, when all of this said and done, do you see or will there be an improvement in terms of citizen safety in the city of Cleveland as it relates to the police getting the bad elements out of our community?
Let me just say that I find the question to be an extraordinary question and an apt question and a fair question. I have no doubt that when the city gets to a place where it has obtained and earned substantial compliance with the consent decree, that what will occur is that the public will gain trust in law enforcement much greater than in years past. And I have no doubt, because the evidence shows this, that where there is trust from the community and law enforcement with each other, that enhances public safety. I also want to recognize the real point that you made, that policing is hard in this time and age, that police departments throughout the country are struggling to retain, recruit good people. And I also believe, therefore, that through the process of this monitoring and the enhancement of trust between community and police, that the process will result in not only the community having greater trust in the police, but in people wanting to become police officers for the right reasons again.
Mr. Chairman, I will yield the floor and come back on the back end. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Just so Mr. Racine knows, as of today, we are at about 1923 levels in the police department. So no one alive today in this city has ever experienced the low levels that we have within the division. So it's of great concern to all of us. Councilman Slife.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to begin, I guess, start with a question to Professor Hardaway. Towards the beginning, you had mentioned, I believe there were 11 pillars and then 340 areas. So would it be correct to characterize that kind of each pillar has roughly an average of 11 areas, and in order for the pillar to be in full compliance, you'd have to have full compliance across all? Could you restate that? And then I'm interested in also hearing what you had indicated of kind of a loss of compliance in areas with the implementation of Charter Section 115. Could you just restate that one more time so I can listen real good this time?
If I could, I don't want you to get bogged down too much in worrying about the average number of areas within each pillar, if you will, because as you heard in my comments, right, use of force has 70 some, right, where others will have 6,
Sure.
right? And so coming up with an average doesn't meaningfully sort of like demonstrate where the bulk of the work may lie, if you will. But nonetheless, right, I gave the 340 number to help sort of like contextualize for the committee the breadth of the work, the expansive nature of the work, if you will. On the way in which this is a dynamic process, I think it's important for everyone.
Dan DeRosa with 19 News. If you are currently watching this on our apps, the Cleveland 19 apps, we're going to switch over our coverage here to our 11 o'clock news. If you're watching on Facebook, you can continue to watch on Facebook.
Area, although it's not what we want, and certainly I know the city works hard to avoid, right? The reality of the situation is that the dynamic process of evaluating a consent decree every 6 months means that some areas may move from either partial compliance or operational compliance to something less than. And that's what I was trying to describe occurred with the CPC, but it's not just true with the CPC, right? The vacancies in the Inspector General position, my apologies, in the Inspector General position, right, necessitated a downgrading of compliance in that area at some point as well. And you'll see it in various other small ways throughout the consent decree, but those are the 2 big ones that I would like to highlight.
Gotcha. So, area of interest, just because I don't know if any of my colleagues saw it, but Councilman Harsh the other day, who's not here, did a program online, kind of an Ask Me Anything. You know, people could type in questions, and one of the questions he got was related to, you know, when City Council going to do this. That I can't remember specifically what it was, related to public safety, and as you would suspect, we get a lot of calls, you know, asking, you know, public safety deployment, all of these things, and Councilman Harsh said, you know, I'm not kicking the can, I'm not trying to deflect, but you know, this is now under the Community Police Commission. This is not under the direct authority of City Council. So I guess I'm interested in knowing that the CPC is onboarding, and there's obviously a learning curve. Could either Professor Hardaway, whomever, kind of characterize how the monitoring team is sort of assisting that ramp up with the Community Police Commission so that we're not causing things to fall out of compliance?
Dan DeRosa with 19 News here. If you're watching our coverage of the consent decree monitoring team giving their report to the City Council's Safety Committee, the overall message is that there has been significant progress in the 340 different areas of compliance. There has been some backsliding due to positions being unfilled, and that there is a lot of work to be done. The new monitor that has been installed here, Carl Racine, the former district attorney for the District of Columbia for Washington, D.C., it's very interesting. We're 8 years into this. We're paying $1.1 million a year as taxpayers for this review committee. And the question was raised, will any of this make the city of Cleveland safer? And the new monitor of the consent decree, who has experience with other cities that have gone through this, basically said that he has no doubt that by restoring trust in police officers and the community, that it will in fact help this city move forward. Does that mean to be able to recruit more officers? You heard the head of the safety committee, Mike Polensek, say that the staffing levels right now in Cleveland are at 1923 levels, meaning the number of individuals that are on the Cleveland police force right now are the same as we had in 1923. that really puts it into perspective. It is a problem that every city is having, including the city of Cleveland. We're going to wrap up our coverage. Our Katie Tursek has been monitoring this as well, and we'll have much more on this on our upcoming newscast. And if we have any other breaking news, we'll bring it to you here on our digital platforms. Our 11 o'clock news just underway on CW43 and our noon news on Channel 19. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News Now. Have a good afternoon.